To the Freud Museum. Many of you will know this place, but I suspect others upon you perhaps not. It's a small but perfectly formed little museum up there in, well, is it Hampstead? Is it Frognall? It's sort of there. Well, if you know where Frognall is, I guess it's at the bottom, and it's where Freud lived here in London when he came in exile from Germany in 1938, if I got the date correct. And there's currently a little exhibition on there called Tracing Freud on the Acropolis. I'm intrigued. So I'm going to find out more from our guest, who is the curator, Giuseppe Albano. Giuseppe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert.
Right then, I'm a little confused. I mean, I know a bit about Freud, and I've been to the museum, and I would heartily recommend it. I love those little kind of house museums that we have in London. I love the Dickens one. I went to Dr. Johnson's one recently. They're great, and they give you a real sense of place and person. But I had no idea that there was any link to Freud and the Acropolis.
Well, there is indeed, Robert. So Sigmund Freud visited Athens for the first and only time in his life in 1904 at the age of 48. Visiting Athens and seeing the Acropolis, one of the world's most famous archaeological sites, was something he dreamed about since boyhood. He was a lover of antiquity. He was well versed in the classics. He even spoke ancient Greek.
Really?
In fact, when he arrived in Athens, the first thing he did was give orders to the taxi driver in ancient Greek, and then was surprised when he wasn't understood. But when you come to see our exhibition, you will discover all about Freud's one and only visit to Athens. And spoiler alert, it didn't quite go so well.
Okay, we'll come on to what went wrong first of all. But why is there any link to his kind of passion or obsession for ancient Greece and his thought, do you think?
Absolutely, Robert. So at the age of 40, so we're talking 1896, Freud had already established or was in the process of establishing psychoanalysis, his theories of the unconscious. He'd been practicing on his famous psychoanalytic couch, which you will see at the Freud Museum since 1891. So he was fairly well established. But in that year, in 1896, he coins the word psychoanalysis. It appears in print for the very first time, but it's also the year that Freud begins maniacally collecting archaeological objects. So yeah, they're inextricably linked, his interests in archaeology and psychoanalysis.
I'm going to get way above my station now in terms of sort of thought and everything else. But would it be linked to the idea that in some ways the present is indelibly tied to the past? That what has gone before us inevitably affects us, even if it was a long time before?
That's absolutely right, Robert. There's also the metaphor of archaeology, which is latent in psychoanalysis. And this is something that Freud drew on several times, comparing the craft, the work of the psychoanalyst to that of the archaeologist. Both are engaged with chipping away, discovering, unearthing hidden truths.
Yeah, I've never thought of it like that, but I guess that's exactly what psychoanalysis does, doesn't it? It scrapes very gently over the surface of your thoughts and emotions and all of that to try and reveal what's below.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And when you visit the Freud Museum, you will not only discover the story of psychoanalysis, but you will see at first hand Freud's collection of 2,500 archaeological objects that he collected during the second half of his life, from the age of 40 onwards.
Collected how? Where was he buying these things? How was he accruing these
Some
things?
were bought from antique shops and markets in Vienna, where he was living before coming to London. Some were given to him as gifts, and some were discovered on his travels. He travelled widely. Obviously, he went to Greece just once, as we've heard, but he went to Italy 24 times. So he was kind of known not only as an analyst, but also as a collector of archaeological objects.
Okay, so I don't know how much of the sort of the punchline of the exhibition you're prepared to give away, but give us a little kind of taster of what happened to Freud when he came upon the Acropolis.
Well, first of all, utter, total disbelief. He experienced what he later described as a moment of derealization. He literally couldn't believe that it existed. It's something that he'd read about, dreamed about, studied, and he couldn't actually believe. When he stood atop the Acropolis Hill by the Parthenon, he just couldn't believe that it was real. In fact, he compares it to seeing the Loch Ness Monster. That's how bizarre it is for him.
How well did he know Scotland?
Actually, you'd be surprised. Well, anyway, you'll discover all about the Loch Ness Monster too when you come to see the exhibition and Freud's thoughts on that. And perhaps more disturbingly for Freud, and this was something it took him many, many years, actually more than 3 decades to fathom, to be able to write about the experience. When he was in his 80s, he finally put pen to paper and tried to process the experience of the kind of sense of guilt that he realized that he'd surpassed his father. He had done what his father, a man of humble economic means, was never able to do or could never even have dreamed of doing, and that is to visit the Acropolis of Athens.
I guess we need to put all of this in context, don't we? In that, international travel is relatively simple now. I mean, it's not as cheap as it once was, but it's still relatively easy and economically kind of sustainable for many people to decide, let's go and see the Acropolis.
Yes, exactly.
It would have been a very, very different process back then.
Very different. And it must be said, Freud hadn't even intended to visit Athens. What had happened was, he was with his younger brother Alexander, named appropriately after Alexander the Great. You can see there was always a classical connection. But they'd intended to go to Corfu, but because of the ferociously hot weather, they were advised to change their minds and go to Athens instead. So Freud was a very meticulously organised person. He didn't like last-minute changes of plans, so I think he was kind of nervous from the outset.
What does the exhibition actually consist of? I don't suppose you've got the Acropolis there.
We've got a huge reproduction of it, yes. Which
Life size?
Well, not quite. And actually, some people have remarked when kind of ascending Trinity Walk from Finchley Road to come and see the Freud Museum, it's a bit like kind of walking up to the Acropolis itself.
I'm not sure many people have said that. But
Oh, if you'd be surprised. Those who take the hard route, of course. Those who kind of take a leisurely walk from Hampstead, it's a little bit easier. But you will find in the exhibition a collection of archaeological objects that inspired Freud and stirred his interest in Greece, including his very, very favourite piece from his collection, which is a little bronze figurine of the goddess Athena, which when Freud was unfortunately had to flee Nazi-occupied Vienna in 1938, this was the first piece from his desk, out of a collection of 2,500, but this was the first piece that he ordered to be rescued. It meant that much to him. You'll also find various other items, some of them from the Acropolis Museum in Athens. You will find manuscripts, letters. You will find a Baedeker guide that Freud would have consulted when he visited Athens. And you will just find the story of Freud's one and only visit to Athens, and you will be encouraged to trace his footsteps, to follow the narrative and take the journey with Freud.
Why do you think there is still such an abiding interest in Freud?
Because Freud is at the centre of so much of our thinking, of our culture, both high and low. He has had an almost unfathomable influence on popular culture, film, obviously psychology, music, literature, art. He's everywhere. He was probably wrong scientifically, just about everything he ever said.
See, that was what I was trying to fathom. I mean, in terms of thought and science and medicine and all the fields that he covers, things have moved on a long way since.
Oh, absolutely, and he's always been controversial, even in his own lifetime. And completely wrong about many things, just proven to be wrong. I mean, if you have an MRI scan, you're not going to find an ego or an aid or a superego or anything like that. A lot of it's very imaginative, but he got the most important thing right. And that is the power of the unconscious.
Well, you can make a conscious decision to get yourself down to the Freud Museum. Give people all the details of when it's open and all of that stuff.
So the museum is open to the public Wednesday to Sunday from 10:30 to 5, and the small but rather fabulous Tracing Freud on the Acropolis exhibition runs till the 7th of January.
Small but rather fabulous. I shall remember that.